Orchard Street tells a story of time, not just the time of generations of immigrants who have passed through the street, leaving their mark on different kinds of shops, but also the time of day. It used to be that on a Sunday like this, the street would be crowded. But now, the street is really empty until about 12 noon. Orchard Street has always been a street of immigrants, shopkeepers, and shoppers. In the 1860s, when these tenement houses were built, the first immigrants came from Germany, and some of them opened bars, beer saloons, in the basements here. The next round of immigrants came from Eastern Europe and Russia. Most of them were Jews, and they opened their stores here. From about the 1880s to the 1980s, most of the store owners here were Jewish. Eventually, this street started to specialize in cheap clothing and fabric stores. And if you look at the old photos of Orchard Street, you see crowds of people on a Sunday like today, pushing and shoving and jostling each other, looking for bargains.
My mother's been retailing in Orchard Street for about 52 years. I think it was 1961 you set up the retail store.
Right. The month after I got married.
Oh, wow. My great-grandfather, which is your grandfather, how he was manufacturing jackets and skirts and cloaks on Division Street in around the 1880s. And then somehow, which maybe you can explain because I don't remember, is how they started Jacobs Brothers and they started supplying the U.S. Navy with white garments.
They were in the midi blouse business during the war. I guess that was for the sailors.
Correct.
And when the war ended, they had all this white goods they didn't know what to do with, so they went into the nurses' uniform business.
When my mother started in 1961, she initially started selling garments that were slight imperfections, so sort of better for less. That's what Lower East Side was always known for, a place where you can get a bargain.
My grandfather bought the building in 1903.
So we've been perpetually in business. I'm the fourth generation that has done business on Orchard Street. I used to be in banking and then reinsurance and eventually came back to help the family. And I grew a real estate company down here where I help other small landlords rent and manage their properties, and as well as an art gallery.
This is where the walking tours for the tenement museums start. There are a lot of tourists who come from around the United States and all over the world. They want to see what life was like for immigrants on the Lower East Side in the 1880s and early 1900s. The museum bought this tenement apartment house in the 1990s. The neighborhood by that point was really racked by decline and even abandonment of property.
We had a lot of commerce, I think, in the 80s. The Wall Streeters used to come to Orchard Street to buy their suits. And they would jump on the JM&Z to get to Orchard Street. Then I believe, Century 21 opened up, and there was a less incentive to what we call schlep to the Lower East Side. And I think it started the decline of retail.
Since the museum opened in the 1990s, Orchard Street has totally changed. The old immigrant-owned stores have died. And there was an opening for new immigrants who began to come in great numbers. A lot of Pakistanis, some Bangladeshi came. We also had a wave of people coming from China. They opened stores on the south end of Orchard Street near Chinatown. A lot of the stores on Orchard Street are empty now because the landlords are charging exorbitantly high rents, as high as $15,000 or $25,000 a month for a small store. The immigrants who have been running businesses here since the 1980s and 1990s can't pay those rents.
I came here in Orchard Street on 2000, about 14 years ago I came here, and I opened one store, and within 5 years I have 3 stores and 7 people work for me, 7. But last 4, 5, 6 years, Orchard Street's change. Bar, restaurant, galleries, they moved here, and our landlord, they asking too much rent. So I keep closing my stores, and this is my last store.
We opened here on Orchard Street in 2009. It was really by chance. Like Richard was down here and we're looking at fabric, walked by, and there was a for rent sign in the window. You know, most of our customers don't live in the neighborhood, I would say. A lot of them come from, you know, the West Village, or they come from Chelsea, or they come from Uptown. We're written up in a lot of magazines and stuff. You know, our first press when we opened, you know, Sally Singer came in from Vogue and did a nice article on us. And we've been in Japanese Elle like 4 or 5 times, and various other magazines. And, you know, and we have connections in the fashion business, and we have somewhat of a following. We've been approached to open a second store, a men's store, but I just looked at a space that was 700 square feet, and the asking rent was $29,000 a month on an out-of-the-way place. I mean, we spend $10,000 a month in advertising down here because the foot traffic is so light. We would be out of business if we didn't, but we can because the rent is reasonable. The independent retailer is disappearing because how can you turn a profit? By the time you pay taxes and labor and overhead and insurance and all the things that go into having a store, you know, you have to basically make 20 times your rent to break even. So do the numbers and it doesn't add up. And that's why I think the only thing that you see existing down here are bars and restaurants.
My parents were founding members in 1992 of the Lower East Side Business Improvement District. When the Lower East Side first formed, the main mission was marketing. We wanted to market the historic commercial corridor of Orchard Street to bring more foot traffic to help our daytime retailers. Some people become very nostalgic about certain businesses and they don't want them to leave the area. Unfortunately, there are market forces. Sometimes the property owner is forced to raise rent to meet increasing tax demands. And the hope is if a retailer can no longer pay the rent, either A, figure out a way to bring in more revenue by going online, or B, looking for another location that would better suit their needs. So organically, stores open and close, and in the end, I hope that we have a nice balance to make the Lower East Side a fun place to continue to attract more people to come and visit us.
Every day brings more of the ABCs of gentrification: art galleries, boutiques, and cafes. This is very different from when I first visited Orchard Street almost 50 years ago. Faces then showed a mix of peoples and cultures that came from everywhere. The street looked both exotic and familiar. That is the diversity that makes cities come alive.